A CEO's voice cracked through the rain. "Keep your hands off my car!" And in that instant, the man she dismissed as help silently decided to save her empire. London, dusk. The rain fell in silver sheets, turning the city into a mosaic of glass and ghostlight. Celeste Hart stepped out of the revolving doors of Helion Optics, her heels striking the pavement like gavel blows. The black sedan waited by the curb, its engine humming low beneath the storm. Inside, Gabriel Navarro sat motionless, eyes fixed on the mirror, the way a soldier studies silence. Celeste yanked the car door open, rain dripping from her trench coat. "Drive," she ordered. "Claridge's, now!" She didn't notice the brief flicker in Gabriel's gaze, the recognition of someone running from something invisible. He adjusted the mirror, said nothing, and eased the car into the blurred maze of Mayfair traffic. Her phone lit up with missed calls, 3 from the Tokyo liaison, 2 from legal, 1 from the board chair. Her pulse quickened. The interpreter for tomorrow's merger had canceled. Severe illness. The $1.4 billion deal that would define Helion's future hung by a single thread, and that thread had just snapped. Celeste's voice rose. "How could they let this happen now? 3 years of groundwork, gone!" She jabbed at her phone, leaving voicemails laced with fury and fear. "Find another translator. Find anyone fluent in Kigo-level Japanese business protocol." The driver's voice, low and measured, entered the chaos. "Ma'am," Gabriel said softly, "may I suggest—" She cut him off. "You may drive. That's what you're paid for." Silence thickened. The kind that doesn't end when words stop, but when pride runs out of breath. Raindrops streaked across the windshield like tiny wars. Then her phone rang again. Marcus Reed, legal chief. "Celeste, Kuroda Group's board refuses to proceed without the same interpreter. They're saying it's a matter of honor. No replacements." She pressed her hand against her temple. "Then we're done." Gabriel's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. His tone changed, steady, deliberate. "If I may, I know someone who can bridge this, at least until you find a professional." Celeste exhaled sharply. "And who might that be? You?" He met her gaze in the mirror. "Yes." She almost laughed. "You think a chauffeur can salvage a €1 billion merger?" "I think," he said calmly, "sometimes the right word costs less than a mistake." Before she could reply, another call came, an assistant from Tokyo, frantic, words colliding between Japanese and English. Celeste couldn't follow the rhythm, the apologies, the terms. Gabriel's hand lifted slightly. "If you allow me." Against every instinct, she handed him the phone. And then something shifted. His voice transformed. Low, resonant, utterly fluent. Japanese rolled off his tongue like silk drawn through water. The rain outside seemed to hush as he spoke, weaving apology with grace, precision with humility. He clarified a misunderstanding in Helion's terms, an issue about equity share perception, and softened what had been escalating toward insult. Celeste stared at him, frozen. The man she'd dismissed 30 minutes ago was now negotiating with the elegance of a diplomat. When he ended the call, silence filled the car again. Only the rhythmic swipe of the wipers remained. "What," she finally whispered, "was that?" He handed back her phone. "A correction, ma'am. Their hesitation wasn't legal. It was cultural." She studied him, creased hands, faint lines at the corners of his eyes, posture unshaken. A man who'd lived through storms bigger than hers. "Who are you?" she murmured. He hesitated. "Someone who's driven many roads, some behind glass, some behind desks. But this one, it's quieter." She wanted to ask more, but the words died on her tongue. The car pulled up under Claridge's marble awning. A doorman approached, umbrella poised. Celeste opened the door, paused, and looked back at him. The distance between them felt like a century and a single breath. "Thank you," she said softly. Gabriel nodded once. "It's what I do, ma'am. I get people where they need to be." She stepped out into the rain, but this time she turned once more before walking inside. Through the glass partition between the front and back seat, she saw his reflection. A man too calm for his uniform, too quiet for his history. And for the first time, the glass between them began to crack. She had spent years commanding rooms of men, but now, one man in silence was commanding her fate. Celeste Hart was not used to wondering. By morning, she had already cross-checked every file in the company database, searching for the name Gabriel Navarro. The chauffeur who had saved her deal the previous night had become an unsolved equation she could not stop balancing. No record beyond the usual, hired 2 years ago through a private agency, spotless background, British citizenship by naturalization. But a faint trace in a public archive caught her eye. Georgetown University, 1999. Doctorate in Linguistics. She froze. 2 more links later, she found a blurred conference photo. U.S. State Department, Global Translation Summit. There he was. Younger, standing behind a podium, nameplate sharp beneath the seal of the United States. Celeste leaned back in her chair. Her reflection in the glass wall of her office looked almost foreign. A woman who had spent a decade climbing a ladder she didn't know rested on someone else's shoulders. When Gabriel arrived that afternoon, she waited in silence, arms folded, voice steady. "So," she said, "how does a Harvard-trained linguist with a PhD from Georgetown end up driving a car for me?" He didn't flinch. "The same way empires fall, Ms. Hart. Slowly, then all at once." Her jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." "No," he said, eyes calm, "but it's the truth." He stood by the door, hat in hand, posture dignified, not defensive. "I worked for the State Department for 22 years, he continued quietly. Diplomatic interpreter. Asia, Middle East, Geneva. When the administration changed, some of us were reassigned. I was too old to be molded, too young to retire. My wife passed that same year. My daughter began medical school. So I drove." Celeste's voice softened despite herself. "And you never thought of teaching again?" "I thought of surviving." The rain had stopped outside, but somehow the air still smelled like storm. For the first time, she saw him not as a subordinate, but as a mirror of everything she might become if ambition ever turned to ash. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly, "for last night." He nodded once. Accepted. She waited, expecting more, a smile perhaps, or a question. But he simply turned toward the window, gaze lost somewhere beyond the city skyline. "The world doesn't collapse when we fall," he said after a pause. "It collapses when we refuse to stand again." Something in those words lodged in her chest, a splinter of wisdom she couldn't extract. Later that evening, as she walked through the Helion garage toward her car, she found him there, polishing the same sedan that had carried her through the storm. The reflection of the overhead lights rippled across the windshield like a veil of memory. "Gabriel," she said, voice tentative. He looked up, waiting. "If the merger proceeds, I'll need someone I can trust," she began. "Someone who understands both language and silence." He studied her for a long moment. "Trust is not built overnight, Ms. Hart. It's built between words." "I know," she said, "but I'd like to start." A faint smile touched his lips. Then let's drive. As he opened the door for her, Celeste realized how unfamiliar humility felt, and how strangely freeing. The city lights flickered across the windshield as the car glided forward, leaving Helion's tower behind. In the quiet between them, something unspoken began to take shape. Not affection, not yet friendship, but respect. The first fragile bridge between two worlds that had never expected to meet. And respect, once born, never returns to silence. Claridge's hotel gleamed like an orchestra of marble and light, but beneath its grandeur, the air pulsed with quiet panic. Celeste Hart walked through the gilded corridor, each step echoing the weight of Helion's future. In a private conference room upstairs, the delegation from Kuroda Group awaited her. They had flown 15 hours from Tokyo, and the slightest misstep now could cost her company €1 billion. And her legacy. Gabriel Navarro walked 3 paces behind her, expression calm, hands folded behind his back. He wore the same dark suit as yesterday, pressed, spotless, unassuming. Yet in the way he moved, unhurried, balanced, there was something no chauffeur had a right to possess. Presence. Inside the conference room, the air was stiff with expectation. 5 men in dark suits, silver nameplates before them. At the center sat Mr. Tanaka, the lead negotiator, his composure smooth as lacquer. "Ms. Hart," Tanaka began, bowing lightly. "We appreciate your persistence." "Likewise," Celeste replied, bowing with measured grace. To her right, Marcus Reed, Helion's legal chief, leaned forward, tapping his pen impatiently. He glanced toward Gabriel with visible irritation. "You don't actually expect him to sit in here, do you?" Celeste met Marcus's stare. "He's here at my invitation." Marcus snorted under his breath. "As what? Security?" Gabriel said nothing. He simply took a chair in the back corner, eyes alert but unfazed. The negotiations began. Numbers crossed the table like soldiers. Percentages, clauses, equity adjustments. Every sentence needed to land with surgical precision. But as the hours passed, something subtle began to shift in the room. The Japanese delegates' expressions grew restrained, their tone cooled. Celeste could feel the energy thinning, as if meaning itself were leaking out through invisible cracks. She tried to recover, clarifying, explaining, but each word seemed to push them further away. And then Tanaka spoke, voice soft but edged. "Ms. Hart, Helion's recent actions suggest lack of sincerity toward partnership. Perhaps we reconsider the balance of trust." The room froze. Marcus leaned forward. "That's ridiculous. We've given full disclosure." "Marcus," Celeste interrupted, voice firm. "Stop." She turned to Gabriel. "You hear it too?" He nodded once. "They're not questioning transparency," he said quietly. "They're questioning respect." Celeste blinked. "Then tell me what to do." He didn't move immediately. Then slowly he stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and stepped forward. The room followed his movement like gravity. When he began to speak, the tone of the meeting shifted entirely. His Japanese was slow, deliberate, tinged with a diplomacy that neither flattered nor defended, only understood. He translated Celeste's intent not as words, but as emotion. Acknowledgement of misunderstanding, gratitude for patience, recognition of equality. Then, turning to Celeste, he murmured in English, "Now speak of what Helion learned, not what it built." She took a breath. "At Helion, every innovation begins with failure. We know perfection doesn't earn trust. Humility does." Tanaka's brows lifted slightly. He nodded, a faint smile forming. For the first time all afternoon, the air in the room softened. What followed wasn't negotiation. It was translation of spirit. Gabriel guided each turn like a conductor, reshaping tension into rhythm. By the time the final clause was reviewed, Tanaka reached across the table and extended his hand. No one spoke. Cameras clicked. In that handshake, 3 years of suspicion dissolved into the quiet grace of understanding. As they exited the room, Marcus muttered, "You got lucky." Celeste looked at Gabriel. "No, we got human." Outside, the evening light broke through the London mist, scattering gold across the wet pavement. Celeste turned to him as they reached the car. "You taught me something in there." He glanced at her. "And what's that?" "That diplomacy isn't performance," she said softly. "It's empathy disguised as precision." Gabriel smiled faintly, opening her door. "Then you've already learned more than most." And as the door closed, she realized something new. That saving a company sometimes began with saving its tone. Peace, once translated, must be defended. It began with a message no CEO ever wants to see. Server breach detected. Helion, Mumbai. The notification blinked across Celeste's phone screen at 2:47 a.m., slicing through the fragile peace she'd managed since London. Her first thought wasn't of money. It was of trust. The kind built in years and lost in seconds. The following hours unfolded like war. Screens flickered in the boardroom as graphs plunged red. The cybersecurity director stammered about unexpected ports. Marcus Reed barked orders that no one followed, and half the legal team hadn't even arrived yet. "Get me the route trace," Celeste snapped, pacing before the digital chaos. "If Kuroda's systems were touched, they'll walk away before sunrise." But the trace led nowhere. A labyrinth of signals routed through Mumbai's data hub. Somewhere between the panic and the noise, Gabriel appeared, quiet as ever, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You shouldn't be here," Marcus hissed. "This is classified." Gabriel set the cups down. "So is breathing when panic's the rule." Celeste looked up. He was still wearing his driver's uniform, sleeves rolled, eyes steady, but his presence cut through the noise like a knife through fog. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Nothing," Marcus said sharply. "This is an IT emergency, not a car problem." Celeste hesitated. Then, against instinct, she said, "Actually, we need order." Gabriel took her laptop, scanned the reports. Within minutes, he began giving instructions. Calm, exact. "Open line to Mumbai," he said. "Get their lead engineer on call." A voice crackled over speaker. "Ma'am, we are losing access to backups." "In Hindi," Gabriel interrupted, switching languages so smoothly the room stilled. He spoke quickly, firmly, but with a tone that didn't command. It guided. Within seconds, the engineer's trembling voice steadied. Then he turned to another screen. "Who's managing the Chinese supplier network?" A stunned silence. "Why?" Celeste asked. "Because if the breach entered through supply-side software, we need Mandarin on the line, not English translation." Without waiting, he switched again. Mandarin this time, fluid and tonal, coordinating instructions like a conductor mid-symphony. The room transformed. Where chaos had ruled, cadence returned. Departments reconnected. Engineers in 3 time zones followed one voice that carried no rank but full authority. By sunrise, the crisis had inverted. What began as a scandal ended as a case study in composure. Celeste stood by the glass wall watching the city wake. The red graphs were green again. Even Marcus was quiet. She turned toward Gabriel. "How many languages do you speak?" He smiled faintly. "Enough to apologize properly." She exhaled, finally letting herself sit. "You saved us again." "No," he said. We just stopped the bleeding before it reached the heart. The rain outside had thinned to mist. In its reflection, she saw something gleaming on the table. A pen, old and cracked near the barrel. Gabriel picked it up, studied it briefly, then extended it to her. "It's broken," she said. He nodded. "So am I. But broken things can still write truth." The weight of it in her hand felt heavier than gold. Later that night, when the building emptied, she sat alone in her office holding the pen. She thought of all the times she'd hidden her own fractures behind authority. For the first time, she wondered if maybe grace wasn't the absence of failure, but the courage to admit it. In the silence, a single message arrived from Tokyo. Kuroda appreciates Helion's swift response. Partnership strengthened. Trust restored. Celeste smiled, eyes glistening with exhaustion and quiet relief. She placed the cracked pen in her desk drawer as if it were a relic, or a reminder. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the lingering storm clouds. And in her mind, she could still hear his voice, calm, measured, impossible to forget. The storm left behind a river. Not destruction, but direction. Trust built on secrets will always beg to be broken. A week after the Mumbai storm, the air in Helion's headquarters was thick with a different kind of tension, quiet, watchful, waiting for something to crack. Celeste Hart could feel it before she saw it, the subtle silence that follows guilt through a hallway. The internal audit had arrived that morning, a confidential report from compliance, printed on cream paper, folded once. It should have been routine. It wasn't. She read it twice before her hands began to tremble. Root breach originated from London. Credentials: Marcus Reed, Chief Legal Officer. Her breath caught. Marcus, her most trusted lieutenant, had caused the storm that nearly destroyed them. And worse, he'd hidden it. She looked up from the report, the city skyline glaring through the glass like an audience of ghosts. If this went public, it wouldn't just destroy Marcus. It could sink Helion entirely. For the first time in years, Celeste didn't know what to do. That night, Gabriel was waiting by the car. He saw the paper in her hand before she spoke. "Bad news?" "Truth," she said, "which might be worse." They drove in silence. The city blurred into streaks of amber and rain. She could hear her own heart over the hum of the engine. Finally, she spoke. "The breach came from Marcus. Not by malice, by arrogance. He left an unpatched port open, ignored the warnings, then covered it up. The question is, what do I do now?" Gabriel's voice was steady, the way truth always is. "You do what your reflection can live with." She stared out the window. "If I expose him, the board will panic. Investors will flee. Everything we rebuilt, gone overnight. And if you don't? Then I become the lie." He nodded. "Sometimes integrity isn't about keeping balance, Ms. Hart. It's about choosing which fall still lets you stand afterward." By morning, her decision was made. At Helion's next board meeting, she stood before 12 men and women whose pens were worth more than apologies. "I'm here," she began, voice unwavering, "to take responsibility." The room stiffened. "Our breach originated in-house. The source has been identified. As CEO, I am accountable. I will submit my resignation for review." Marcus shot up from his seat. "You can't be serious. You're throwing away the company to look virtuous?" Celeste met his fury with silence. She slid the report across the table. He glanced down and froze when he saw his own name. "Don't," she said softly. "Not another lie." The others watched in stunned disbelief as Marcus's face collapsed into rage, shame, and disbelief. He stormed out, slamming the glass door so hard the walls shook. No one spoke for a long time. Then one of the board members, a woman in her 70s who'd known Celeste since her first promotion, said quietly, "You just saved the company." Celeste exhaled. "No, he did." She glanced toward the hallway where Gabriel stood, unseen, waiting as always. That evening, she found him near the loading bay, standing beside the car, eyes turned toward the fading light. "You were right," she said, "about reflections." He smiled faintly. "They don't lie. They just wait for us to stop pretending." They talked for hours after that, not about business, but about the things that never make headlines, their fathers. How both men were dreamers who built more out of hope than money. How both had died before their children truly understood them. Celeste told him she'd once promised her father she'd never fail in public. Gabriel told her that some failures were the only way to return home to ourselves. When she finally rose to leave, the night was still and strangely forgiving. As the car pulled away, she looked at his reflection in the mirror, the man who had taught her that silence could be stronger than any speech. Truth, once spoken, becomes a promise. She'd built empires of glass. Now she was learning how to build one made of forgiveness. The morning after Marcus's resignation, London felt quieter, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Helion's tower stood against the pale sky like a monument of reflection, each glass panel catching the fragile light of dawn. Celeste Hart arrived before anyone else. Her footsteps echoed through the marble atrium that had once felt like triumph and now felt like truth. The board had accepted her confession, but not her resignation. They called her reckless, brave, naive, sometimes all in one sentence. Yet she'd never felt more certain of anything in her life. By 8 o'clock, the senior staff gathered in the executive conference room. Gabriel stood near the back, silent as always, his presence the only steady rhythm in a room full of uncertainty. Celeste began without ceremony. Helion has spent years chasing perfection, numbers, margins, control, but the past month has shown us something different. We survived not because of secrecy, but because of transparency. Murmurs rose. She continued, her tone like glass under pressure but refusing to shatter. From this day forward, Helion will operate on a new foundation: open audits, shared failures, and public accountability. If that costs us investors, so be it. I'd rather lead an honest company that stumbles than a perfect one that lies. Across the table, one board member whispered, "You'll burn your reputation doing this." Celeste smiled faintly. "Maybe. But maybe fire is how glass learns to be stronger." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Gabriel stepped forward. "If I may," he said softly. The room turned toward him, a man in a modest suit, speaking with the calm of oceans. "Forgiveness," he said, "isn't weakness. It's how a system repairs itself. You can rebuild trust faster than reputation, but never the other way around." The words landed with quiet force. Something shifted in the room, fear giving way to stillness. By evening, the media had the story. At first, headlines were merciless. CEO admits failure, investors panic. But within 48 hours, the narrative changed. Analysts began praising Helion's transparency. Public sentiment turned. Even the markets steadied. Celeste watched it unfold from her office window. The skyline glittered like glass learning to breathe again. She turned as Gabriel entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You've been quiet," she said. He smiled. "That's usually when people listen." She hesitated, then asked, "Why did you stay, Gabriel?" After everything, you could have left. He placed one cup before her. Because my daughter still believes I'm a diplomat, and for the first time in years, I'd like to make that true again. Celeste felt something ache and heal all at once. Then let's start there, she whispered. Let's make Helion the kind of place your daughter would be proud of. He nodded, eyes soft. Then you already have. They stood by the window as the city blushed beneath the rising sun. For the first time, she wasn't thinking of profit margins or press releases, only the strange, luminous peace that follows after confession. Gabriel looked at the skyline, voice low. You rebuilt the company this morning. No, she said, smiling faintly. You did. I just signed the papers. Outside, the Thames shimmered gold, carrying the dawn through the city's veins. Redemption, like sunrise, demands the night first. The first storm had nearly destroyed Helion. The second was born from admiration. After Celeste's public confession and the company's rebirth, the media crowned her the CEO who chose truth. Interviews, think pieces, conference invitations, her name was suddenly synonymous with redemption. But beneath the applause, a shadow stirred. Marcus Reed, the man she had once called her right hand, had reemerged. It began with a headline, Whistleblower reveals, Helion's savior story was a lie. Then came another. Sources claim CEO covered up former diplomat's scandal. Within days, the story spread like oil on water. Anonymous blogs leaked fragments of Gabriel's past, fragments only someone close could have known. His years at the State Department, his forced resignation, the classified operation that went wrong. Twisted, edited, rebranded as deceit. Helion's investors panicked. Journalists demanded answers. Protesters stood outside the glass tower holding signs that said, "Fraud wears a suit." In the boardroom, voices clashed. You need to distance yourself, one member urged. Fire him. Issue a statement before this destroys you both. Celeste stood at the head of the table, spine straight. He's not the liar, she said coldly. He's the reason we're still standing. But the headlines didn't care about truth. They never did. That night she called Gabriel. Meet me on Blackfriars Bridge. Midnight. When he arrived, the city was soaked in twilight, that bruised hour between guilt and forgiveness. Streetlights burned like scattered prayers along the Thames. You shouldn't be out here, he said quietly. Neither should you, she replied. Not after what they've done to you. He smiled faintly. They're not doing it to me. They're doing it to their idea of me. That's an old game. She clenched her fists. He's destroying everything you've rebuilt. Then let him, Gabriel said simply. Sometimes lies collapse under their own noise. Celeste turned away, trembling. I can't watch you be humiliated for something you didn't do. He looked at her, eyes soft with calm resignation. You're not watching humiliation. You're watching endurance. But she wasn't built for silence anymore. The next morning, Helion's communications team gathered in panic. A press conference had been scheduled without approval. The media would be there in hours. Celeste had written her own speech. At sunrise, she stepped onto the stage. No teleprompter, no PR filters. The cameras flashed like lightning. I've been asked about the man who sits behind me in the car I once thought I owned, she began. They call him a fraud. They call him a ghost. But the truth is simpler. He's the reason you're all here. A hush fell over the crowd. Gabriel Navarro spent 20 years serving nations that forgot him. He speaks 6 languages but was never once truly heard. He saved this company not for money, not for pride, but because he still believes in bridges. between people, between mistakes, between worlds. She paused, eyes glistening. Dignity isn't a title. It's a choice. And today, I choose to stand beside the man who taught me that. The room erupted in applause, not wild, but reverent, as if something sacred had been restored. In the shadows behind the curtain, Gabriel stood still, eyes lowered, heart unsteady for the first time in years. Later that night, as the noise faded and the lights of London softened into memory, Celeste found him again on the bridge where everything had begun. The same curb, the same hum of distant traffic, the same rain-tinted glow. "I had to," she said. "You deserved your truth." He shook his head. "I never wanted a spotlight, just silence that wasn't empty." She smiled through tears. "Then take this moment, Gabriel, not as applause, but as peace." He looked out at the river. "Bridges aren't built for applause," he said softly, "only for crossing." The city shimmered in reflection. Two lives mirrored in the water, neither above nor below, simply parallel. And sometimes crossing means letting go. Before the world called him a hero, he just wanted his daughter to know the truth, so. The applause from the press conference had faded into silence, but its echoes still lingered in the marble halls of Helion. The company had survived yet another storm, and for the first time, Celeste Hart could feel the calm not as a pause before collapse, but as peace earned. Gabriel Navarro, however, felt something different. He'd become the story he never wanted to be. His face had been printed beside headlines, his name woven into corporate folklore. But under every spotlight, he felt only the absence of one small voice, his daughter's. That night, after the city lights dimmed and the world turned quiet, he sat at his modest desk with a single sheet of paper and his cracked pen. The same one he'd given Celeste months ago now returned to him like a relic of unfinished truth. He began to write. "My dearest Lily, I've told you many stories about the world, about diplomacy and duty, about the power of words, but I never told you the truth about the years between. The years when I stopped believing in what I was meant to protect." The words came slowly, careful as breathing. "I was not the diplomat you thought I was. I became a driver. I carried others toward their destinies while pretending mine was complete. But something unexpected happened. I found meaning in the silence between orders, in the small mercies no one noticed." He stopped. The rain tapped against the window like someone knocking gently from another time. "I met a woman who reminded me what courage sounds like, not the kind in speeches, but the kind that admits failure and still walks forward. She didn't rescue me, Lily. We rescued each other." He signed the letter but didn't seal it. Not yet. The following morning, Celeste entered his office, carrying a folder and a rare smile. "I have an offer," she said. "Official. Helion wants you as Vice President of Global Affairs." He blinked, surprised. "That's generous." "It's overdue," she replied. "The title you lost once? Let's restore it." He looked down at the letter still resting on his desk. "Titles don't change what matters." "Then what does?" "Whether the people we love would still recognize us when the noise fades." Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. She turned pale. "It's Tanaka," she said. "Heart attack, Tokyo. The deal's in jeopardy again." Within hours, they were on a flight, the world once more asking too much of one man. At the hospital in Shinjuku, the smell of antiseptic and chrysanthemums filled the air. Tanaka lay motionless, machines whispering what his body could no longer say. Around him, executives whispered about contracts, clauses, control. Gabriel stepped forward. Enough, he said in Japanese. His voice, though quiet, carried finality. A partnership built on fear isn't a partnership. It's hostage-taking. He sat beside Tanaka's bed, speaking softly. You once told me bridges outlive builders. If that's true, then this deal will stand, because you taught me to build without pride. Tanaka's eyes fluttered open for a moment. His hand gripped Gabriel's weakly. The man who understands silence, he murmured, will carry our bridge. By evening, the press reported it as a miracle. The merger stood firm, even as its architect faded from the world. Later, in the hotel overlooking Tokyo's neon sprawl, Gabriel finally sealed the envelope to Lily. He placed it beside his passport and whispered to the quiet, "No more fiction." The letter would reach her with truth, not grandeur. It would tell her of the languages he spoke, the mistakes he made, the bridge he helped build, not across nations, but hearts. Celeste found him there, watching the city burn gold through the rain. "What did you write?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A confession. And maybe a beginning." She nodded. "Then you're already forgiven." Outside, Tokyo glimmered like a constellation reflected on wet glass. The world kept turning, unaware that somewhere in its endless hum, a single letter was about to mend two lives, and some bridges stretch farther than oceans. After saving the world's faith in language, he returned to the only one that ever mattered, his daughters. The jet descended through a sky of pale gold, slicing the clouds over Maryland like a quiet promise fulfilled. Gabriel Navarro stared through the window, his reflection faint against the dawn. The Tokyo deal had closed, the bridge complete. The world was calling him a miracle worker again, newspapers printing his face beside words like diplomat turned savior. But none of that mattered. Not now. What mattered was the envelope in his pocket. Creased, carried across continents, addressed in a daughter's name he had whispered more often than prayed. When he stepped out into the chill of Washington air, the noise of airports and cameras fell away. He didn't wait for chauffeurs or reporters. He rented a small car and drove himself south, through rolling highways and fields dusted with morning light until the signs began to read. Johns Hopkins Medical Campus. He parked, breathing slower than usual. It had been 3 years since he'd last seen her. 3 years since the distance between them had become his punishment and his penance. Inside the campus cafe, Lily Navarro sat at a corner table, still in her scrubs, a half-eaten sandwich beside her tablet. She looked up when she heard the familiar voice. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Her hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. The sound was softer than memory, but deeper than time. She turned, eyes wide, tears already forming before she could speak. "Dad?" He smiled, hesitant, fragile. "I'm sorry I'm late." She rose, and for a long moment they simply stood there, the noise of the world dissolving around them. Then she stepped forward and hugged him with the force of years unsaid. When they finally sat, she looked at him, the lines deeper now, but the warmth unchanged. "I read the news," she said. "You saved them again." He shook his head. "No, I just listened when everyone else shouted." Her smile trembled. "You don't owe the world anything anymore, you know." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I came home." He reached into his coat and handed her the letter. "It's yours. Everything I never said is inside." She didn't open it. She just held it to her heart. "You didn't fall, Dad," she whispered. "You just landed where you were needed." He closed his eyes, the weight of years lifting with every word. Later, they walked through the garden behind the hospital. Benches, fountains, nurses hurrying past with purpose and light. She told him about her mother's old stethoscope she still carried in her locker, how sometimes she'd listen to her own heartbeat before night shifts just to remember where she came from. Gabriel smiled. Your mother would have been proud. Lily glanced up at him. So would she. Across the ocean, Helion was changing too. Celeste had launched Project Horizon, a new humanitarian initiative producing low-cost optical tech for pediatric hospitals. The first shipment was named after Lily's mother, the Helena line. When Gabriel saw the announcement on his phone, he said nothing, only looked at the photograph. Celeste standing before a crowd of doctors, the company's logo reframed with a simple inscription underneath. For those who still believe in light. That evening, Celeste called. How does it feel? She asked. Like I finally stopped driving, he replied. Good, she said. Then maybe now you can rest. He smiled. Rest isn't the goal, Celeste. It's the reward. Outside his window, the first stars appeared over Baltimore. Soft, unassuming, eternal. His daughter's laughter floated from the kitchen, mixing with the faint hum of the city below. He thought of the bridges he had built, some across nations, others across hearts. All of them led here, because home isn't a place. It's the peace you learn to stay in. He had built bridges across languages, nations, and hearts. Now he was ready to cross the last one, toward peace. Baltimore's autumn came quietly that year. Leaves drifting like slow confessions across the harbor, gulls circling above the water that reflected a softer kind of light. In a small apartment overlooking the bay, Gabriel Navarro began writing again, not for reports, not for diplomacy, but for himself. His desk was bare except for his cracked pen, a cup of black coffee, and a manuscript bound with string. On the cover, he had written in steady letters, Bridges, a life between words. He wasn't writing about victories. He was writing about silences, the pauses between sentences, the places where forgiveness waited. Each chapter began with a sound he remembered, the hum of London rain, the static of a Tokyo hospital, his daughter's laughter through a phone line. He wrote slowly, like someone measuring every breath. Sometimes Celeste would call from London, her voice framed by city wind and distant sirens. She was busier than ever, leading global initiatives, lecturing on corporate ethics, being everything the world now praised her to be. Yet, she always began the same way. Gabriel, are you still writing? And he would answer smiling, still learning to. One evening, she invited him to a ceremony, Helion's 10-year anniversary gala. He declined the first 2 invitations. The third time, she sent a note instead. You taught me that arrival isn't about the destination, but the grace with which we return. So he went. The ballroom was gold and glass, filled with people he'd never met, but who somehow already knew his story. As Celeste took the stage, her words carried not grandeur but gratitude. When I first met Gabriel Navarro, she began, I thought he was just the driver. But sometimes the person you least notice holds the map you didn't know you needed. She paused, letting the words settle. The man who drove me, she continued, taught me how to arrive. The applause came like a wave, not thunderous, but deep. Gabriel stood at the back, heart steady, eyes damp. He didn't move. He didn't need to. After the event, she found him near the entrance where the lights were softest. You should have been up there, she said. I was, he replied, tapping his chest lightly. Some bridges don't need names carved into them. They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter born from shared history, not humor. Then they said goodbye the way old travelers do, with gratitude, not sorrow. Weeks passed. Winter approached. Gabriel's book neared its final page. He spent mornings walking along the pier with Lily, evenings reading aloud drafts that made her roll her eyes and smile. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Silence had finally become a language they both understood. On the last night of the year, he sat by the window as snow began to fall. Soft, slow, unhurried. He picked up his pen, turned to the final line, and wrote, "Sometimes the cracks are where the light chooses to enter." He placed the pen down, exhaled, and let the peace fill the room. Across the ocean, in London, Celeste stood by her office window, watching rain streak the glass the same way it had the night they met. She thought of his words, his calm, his endless humility, and whispered, almost as prayer, "Thank you, Gabriel." The city lights reflected in the Thames like molten stars, and somewhere beneath that same sky, a daughter and her father watched the same moon from different sides of the world. And across two skies, a single bridge of light remained, between the woman who learned to listen and the man who taught her how.